So
Okay, let's start.
as we move along, one of the things to keep at the top of your mind is that Nietzsche at this point with his first book is very much under the influence of Schopenhauer, but he does break away from Schopenhauer. And so it's important to just keep remembering that this will and representation is the way he's approaching a lot of this stuff. Um, So I want to mention that. And the other thing is that the tragedies were performed at annual festivals. It wasn't like these went on all the time. They went on once a year for 3 days, and everybody got pretty drunk and had a kind of a good time. And then they went and watched the tragedies and had a tragic time. And I thought that trying to find a modern analog to that, I thought of the passion plays that occur at Easter because at these religious festivals, the Athenians believed in these gods. And so if you are a religious Christian, The Passion of the Christ is a very powerful film. And it's a good movie in its own right, I think. It has 7.2 on the IMDb rating. Um, but you can get a sense of what the tragic experience might have been like. If you're a believer, that's even better because you will immerse yourself more completely in what's being done. But it's the closest I've come to coming up with a modern equivalent or analog, really. It's not equivalent in a lot of ways. Um, okay, so there's that. So we're going to go ahead and start. So my summary is a little bit better than it was the last time, and hope this is it, just one page. The Apollonian and Dionysian are, metaphorically, contrary artistic forces. The world of symbolic images and beauty, and the fundamental, unmediated world of the primal unity, its pain and contradiction, its intent to destroy individuality. At some point, the Dionysian festivals of the Greeks, unlike the savage rituals of surrounding cultures, were transformed into, and all the quotes are from Nietzsche, festivals of world redemption and days of transfiguration. The most important moment in the history of the Greek Olympian cult, because existence under the bright sunshine of such gods is regarded as desirable in itself, reversing the wisdom of Silenus and opening the door to what would become tragedy. Schopenhauer's will represents itself in the real world as a continuously manifested representation of the primal unity, a mere appearance. And art is the mere appearance of mere appearance, further proof of the will's desire for redemption through illusion. In Greece, the Dionysian and the Apollonian, in new births ever following and mutually augmenting one another, controlled the Hellenic genius, the sublime and celebrated art of Attic tragedy, and the dramatic dithyramb presents itself as the common goal of both these tendencies. The first evidence for this fusion are symbolically contrasted between the epic poetry of Homer, the Apollonian naive artist, and the lyric poetry of Archilochus, continually saying I and running through the entire chromatic scale of his passions and desires. Compared with Homer, Archilochus appalls us by his cries of hatred and scorn, by his drunken outbursts of desire. So this is carrying us up from 1 through the very beginning of section 5. And so now we're just going to roll on here. So before the act of creation, Schiller, very famous German poet of the time, did not have before him or within him any series of images in a causal arrangement, but rather a musical mood. With me, the perception has at first no clear and definite object. This is formed later. A certain musical mood comes first, and the poetical idea only follows later. So, why does Nietzsche refer to Schiller? How does this bolster his argument or even like suggest the argument?
I'll have a go.
All right.
I had my notes for answering this question about half an hour ago, and I was just touching it up a little bit, and it deleted most of it. So I tried to capture what I had written just off the top of my head in the 5 minutes before we began. So Schiller's comment for Nietzsche, that his first step is a musical mood that moves him to describe it in words. This musical mood arrives by melding the self with the primary unity, which is the musical mood, a feeling, the Dionysius half of the two elements of subjectivity. The other half is the Apollonian that demarcates into form this mood as images in words. These two parts, music and words, produce the beauty of song. Nietzsche uses this experience that Schiller describes to describe the aesthetic being of the world. This unity is the impetus that moves us, Schopenhauer's will, the subjective I of the world, the subjectivity of the world as our impetus, our motivation to move.
Well, that's pretty good. Thanks. I appreciate that. James.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's much more detailed than I had in mind. I think he's making an example of Schiller as a contemporary poet, and that who is illustrating the primacy of music in his comment on his methodology in poetry. So he's pointing to Schiller as an example of the primacy of music in the poetic art. So that music leads to poetry, music provides an example to the poet, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's an attitude of music, because that's the case that Nietzsche is going to try to make here, that this musical beginning is the Dionysian expression. Quan.
Okay, so I would like to say that Schiller is well known as having formed a kind of philosophical friendship with Wolfgang Goethe, and the two alone created a period called the Classicism of Weimar. And here I think that Nietzsche, after all, who was born in 1860, so 55 years after the death of Schiller, for Nietzsche, Schiller was kind of a model, if you want, for classicism, for precisely maybe more that Apollonian component than for the Dionysian component. Even if when you said about the musical attitude, I rather tend to agree with that expression, in the sense that Schiller is famous for having written the aesthetical letters for education, and it is precisely those letters that are, according to me, the center of his philosophy. Meaning, let's not forget that aesthetics come from Greek aesthesin, meaning sensation. And when you were speaking of the musical attitude, I was thinking about that, the aesthetics, aesthesin, sensation, okay? That is the musical form, but also the philosophical form, also the drama form, because he wrote many dramas, expressing precisely that classical aesthetics.
Yeah, that was a nice piece of history. It's you know a lot more there than I do. I don't know how many of you have ever written anything, and I was just thinking of this today, but I used to write essays when I was at college, and the hardest thing to do was to get the opening paragraph right. And I've often described after, when I look back at these things, as a moment where it just fits. And how I've described that, without really intending to be Nietzschean about the whole thing, is the paragraph has a rhythm and a music to it. the whole the language and the sound and the ideas being expressed all fit together into this pattern that has a kind of harmony to it. So I don't know if I'm sharing that just in case any of you have had a similar experience. Okay. The most important phenomenon of all ancient lyric poetry, they took for granted the union, indeed the identity of the lyrist with the musician. As a Dionysian artist, he has identified himself with the primal unity, its pain and contradiction. Assuming that music is a repetition and a recast of the world, this is from Schopenhauer, we may say that he produces the copy of this primal unity as music. Now, however, under the Apollonian dream inspiration, this music reveals itself to him again as a symbolic dream image. The image that now shows him his identity with the heart of the world in a dream scene that embodies the primordial contradiction and primordial pain together with the primordial pleasure of mere appearance. So the question I threw out here was, what is the meaning of the primordial pleasure of mere appearance? Some of these questions may not have been reflected because I think I fooled around with this a little bit. So do you have any thoughts about, this is sort of explicit in its own way, but the primordial pleasure of mere appearance. Quan.
The primordial pleasure of mere appearance. Here I go back to aesthetic sensation. It is precisely that eruption of sensation, precisely, okay, that would give that primordial pleasure in the sense that raw pleasure, okay, without analysis, without philosophizing precisely, and which precisely is very Dionysian, okay, because that is precisely that eruption of pure nature, pure sensation, pure perception without analysis. That's what I would say.
Yeah, that's pretty good. So it's not all destructive and horrible. There's a certain amount of, like, presumptively, I think he's sort of saying that the will, Schopenhauer's will, wants, that's the pleasurable experience comes from representation, mere appearance, creating mere appearance. Michelle.
Can you put the question back up again for me, please? I didn't see this question before today.
What is the meaning of the primordial? I'll put it up. I already forgot. What is the meaning of the primordial pleasure of mere appearance?
I think that's because the mere appearance is the being of the world as an aesthetic being. So the mere appearance is the primal unity representing appearance as beauty, as a form other than its unity prior form.
Well, okay. I think it's more that it's just, it would be considered, and remember, this is all metaphorical. It isn't like the will is actually, going, wow, boy, do I feel good creating the world.
The will, the will of the world is artistic. It's creation, and it's creating its appearance out of
representation.
being.
And in Schopenhauer terms. And we're coming to a really important part of this particular section. James. You're muted, James.
I'm sorry. Yeah. He's talking, I think this is Section 5, right? So this is the actually a reference. This is in German. It's the word shine. It's the glitter. The idea that it's not necessarily it's not the word appearance. It's the word the showing. You know how things show up. The mere appearance of something, the shine of something, or the glitter that it gives, the way it casts an image, and the whole the whole um, and it's translated in my version as illusion, which is correct. That's a correct translation as well. Unity in the heart of the world, a dream scene, which symbolizes the original contradiction and pain, together with the primordial joy in illusion. So this is the idea that this is part of the Dionysian process and the disintegration of the I. In other words, the I is not in charge. The subjectivity is not in charge of the process. It's been surrendered. That's Nietzsche's words. The artist has already surrendered his subjectivity and the Dionysian process. The image which now reveals to him his unity with the heart of the world is a dream scene, etc., echoes, and the eye of lyric poet thus echoes out of the abyss of being. What recent aestheticians mean by his subjectivity is mere fantasy. So Nietzsche is making an important statement here against the idea of pure subjectivity in the artist.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I think we're going to get to that part in a minute. I'm not sure. I don't remember everything I had. Well, I guess what I'm kind of reaching for, Jason, what do you want? Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I just feel like primordial pleasure kind of by theory is like if you compare to philosophy, it's a hedonism, and then Apollonia would be more like Epicurean. That's I feel like. Just
Okay.
I'll have some of that. What are you serving, Jason?
I mean,
what are you serving, Jason?
I mean,
I said, what are you serving? You said Epicurean. You know, like what's on the menu? Yeah.
Oh no, I'm talking about philosophical Epicurean. I'm not talking about
the
food kind of that. So I talk about in the philosophical field because we talk about hedonism and Epicurean. And to me, I feel very much like you talk about the Dionysian and Apollonia.
They're not exactly the same thing, because the Epicurean is the pure pleasures of life and the recognition of the importance of appreciating every last drop.
Yeah, I know that, but I just share my theory, because my interest is more on the philosophical side. So that's the only thing I can relate it.
Okay, I sort of think what I feel here is that what he's just reemphasizing the notion that the will finds redemption in illusion.
Which is up.
And so the illusion is an
Sorry.
important aspect of the will itself, right? Okay. When Archilochus, the first Greek lyrist, proclaims to the daughters of Lycidas both his mad love and his contempt, poems that resulted in her suicide, it is not his passion alone that dances before us in orgiastic frenzy, but we see Dionysus and the Maenads. We see the drunken reveler, Archilochus, sunk down in slumber, and now Apollo approaches and touches him. Then the Dionysian musical enchantment of the sleeper seems to emit sparks, lyrical poems, which in their highest development are called tragedies and dramatic dithyrambs. The images of the lyrist are nothing but his very self, and, as it were, only different projections of himself. So he, as the moving center of this world, may say, I. Of course, this self is not the same as that of the waking, empirically real man, but the only truly existent and eternal self resting at the basis of things, through whose images the lyric genius sees this very basis. So, in the one poem, and I can go back and do that again if you want, I don't know if you remember that, but it was basically Archilochus was portraying himself as the man dying on the field of battle. And he was celebrating how many people he had killed and how, you know, they won the battle at sea and all, and it was I. And so who is the I in that particular poem, or any poem that presumptively a lyric poet would be writing? Michelle.
I haven't read that poem. I don't remember it from you reading it last week. I've only drawn out what I can find in part 5 of Nietzsche and what's been read before. But the I of Archilochus is a deluded idea because Archilochus, being a lyrical poet, has fused with the primal unity, so has surrendered that subjectivity, that I. So the I, or subjectivity, is expressed through the abyss of being, that primal unity, which I believe means that that's where the contradiction, pain, and pleasure get their name as irrational, emotional, and untrustworthy to be truth, given truth is synonymous with observation, erection, demarcation, what can be seen, which in the abyss is only expressed as a dream of an appearance.
Okay,
So-
James. Oh, are you done? Are you done, Michelle?
Yeah.
James.
Thank you. Yeah, I think when he mentions it, he's referring. I think the gist of what he's referring to is the lyric poet in general. A lyric poet who's following the Dionysian process is the eye of the Archilochus poems, signifies a pure example of the lyric poet in the Dionysian process. I think that's what Nietzsche is actually trying to suggest, that Archilochus is the lyric poet in the Dionysian process. That's very important to Nietzsche. The idea that the Dionysian process is a kind of like an outgrowth of this spirit of Apollonian and the Apollonian and Dionysian dialectic, if you will.
Yeah. No, I think dialectics is probably something somewhat appropriate. Jason.
Yeah, I have a question. Is anybody know, does Plato mention about Archilochus in his dialogue, or how important of Archilochus? Because I don't know him, you know, until today. So until reading this. So
Yeah, I didn't know him either until I started doing a little research. That's how I dug up that one particular poem. But Nietzsche makes the case that and I think Archilochus is the right pronunciation, but I'm not sure, so I'm going to keep saying it that way. Was the first lyric poet, and he may be just as legendary as, well, probably not, because there are fragments. Well, legendary in the sense that Homer, nobody really knows who Homer was. He's a virtual legendary character. It may have been more than one person. Blah blah blah. That whole thing. So what Nietzsche is writing is pretty much what I think is known about him, except from other references from other sources who acknowledge that Archilochus lived, and it's Plato possibly did at some point, but Plato wanted to banish poetry from the Republic, so it's unlikely that he was going to celebrate him in any way at all. But the early Greek coins had Homer on one side and Archilochus on the other. And so they were identified as primary creators of this kind of artistic tradition. Quan.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I read a lot of Plato, and can I guarantee you that Archilochus was never mentioned in any of Plato's dialogue or in his letters. And I agree with Lindsay that Plato was not 100% adamant on banning all the poets from the city, but I'm sure that Archilochus would be the kind that he would have banned. So, the other thing I want to mention is that I absolutely see it as a Dionysian manifestation. Because during classical times, it was after the Battle of Marathon, the soldiers asked to a young man to dance over the dead corpses of their enemies. So it was something very spontaneous after a bloody battle. So that kind of eye dancing over the corpses of that enemy, for me, is the primordial manifestation precisely of that Dionysian energy, which precisely Plato is the absolute opposite. I stop here.
Yeah, that's pretty nice spin on it that hadn't really thought of. Where I began and ended with this was just the notion that the eye of the poem is not the poet, and expressing it the way you just did, as it's the primal unity speaking, or that's who it is. That's who it is. That's who the eye is. The eye is the one at the basis of human life. Jason.
Yeah, I have another question. I remember Bertrand Russell talking about the Dionysian cult is from East, okay, and the mystic from East and from most likely from Egypt. I'm not sure how true it is. Does anybody know?
Yeah, I would like to offer my critics of Bertrand Russell. Russell was a British aristocrat born in 1870, meaning even if he died in 1972, so he lived a very long life. He was essentially a man of the 19th century. And he tend to have that, because let's not forget that the image that we have of the Greek, for example, the marble statues who are completely white, for example, is a fabricated image by the aristocracy, by the European aristocracy of the end of the 19th century, or of the end of the 18th century and of the 19th century, because and I will explain to you guys why I take that example of the statues, okay? The Greek statues in our collective imagination are always white marble. It's wrong, okay? Those statues were full of color. So the way that we have a misconception of the Greek statues, the same we have a misconception of the Greek words through the eyes of the European bourgeoisie and aristocracy of the 19th century, which is a projection of what they think they were, because those people took the Greek as a kind of ideal image of themselves, and that image has been cleaned a lot, so that projection of Dionysian dimension to the Egyptians or the Orientals, and that the West would have the Apollon dimension, is a very, very close-minded interpretation, according to me, and according to what archaeology and text interpretation and analysis can offer us nowadays, compared to what has been understood or projected in the 19th century.
Yeah, well, I did some research somewhere along the line on this, and Dionysus was not one of the original Olympian gods. He was imported, and it's possible that the Dorian invasion brought Dionysus with them. So it's not a Greek creation. Dionysus is not. The legend is legends may support that sort of thing, but the actual history of it is Dionysus came in from, I don't know where, somewhere. James.
Oh,
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the reason that Homer is brought in is because he appears in paintings, cameos, friezes, things like that. In other words, there's visual evidence for Nietzsche that Antilochus and Archilochus and Homer sitting together, as symbols of the ancient art of poetry, and together, as sort of twin peaks of the ancient art of storytelling or poetry. Yeah. So, or lyric poetry, even perhaps. So, if you can call, I think you can call Homer a lyric poet too, even though Nietzsche doesn't give him that honor. So that's the reason. And Plato, of course, is we can't really cast him into the discussion. We have to be very careful about casting him into this discussion, because this is a discussion about the ancient Dorian mythology, which Plato wasn't. He referenced it, but he's not a part of it.
I think Nietzsche is correct in identifying Homer as an epic poet and not a lyric poet. And that's what he's trying to contrast as the differences
Right.
in this kind of poetry that will come together in a way in tragedy. That's where he's heading with this. So that's why he's trying to establish the grounds of what epic poetry is and what lyric poetry is. Quan.
you were speaking of the Dorians. Do you consider them Greeks?
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite.
Do you consider the Dorians Greek?
Well, they became Greek. Yeah, they invaded in 1100, 1200 BC. They preceded Homer, and they conquered the Achaeans and all the rest of them that were around there. That's what I got. Of course, it's from Wikipedia.
Yeah.
But yeah, the
Yes.
Dorians.
So they were Greek. So they.
It made Greece.
Yeah, because the people before them can be called the Achaeans or the Mycenaeans. They were populating the island of Crete too. But I would say that if there's a population that could be characterized as Hellenes and not Hellenistic, because Hellenistic, as you know, is more with Alexander, but Hellenes are precisely the Dorians, because they were the immediate ancestors of the Greek of the classical period of the 5th and this 4th century BCE, right?
Well, not the immediate ancestors. Well, I don't know. I don't have to think about that.
There is a supposedly called Dark Age, okay? Starting with the invasion, 1200 BCE, to the time of Homer, around 750 BCE. And from Homer, let's say, to Pericles, it was called, well, let's say to Solon, it was called the Archaic period.
Right.
And after that, you have the classical period, okay? In terms of population, the Dorians were the genetic and cultural ancestors of the people from the Archaic period and the classical period.
Okay, James.
Well, there's also, I was just going to suggest there's also a Peloponnesian, constitution. There were people living in Crete when this invasion of Sparta and those areas occurred by the Dorians. There were people already living around Athens and the islands and so forth.
Yeah.
They didn't disappear because they were invaded.
Okay.
Can I have, oh, sorry, I've got to find my hand up, raised hand bit. I just did a search to see what Dorian is in the dictionary, and it says it's a dialect of Greece in the Hellenic time of Greece. but I've lost the page. I'll just get it back for a sec.
No, that's okay, Michelle, that's okay. Nietzsche doesn't give a hoot and a holler about what the actual answer is.
I don't think it's
So why
important
don't
for these arguments.
We're back to this book and what Nietzsche is trying to say, and not care anymore about where Dionysius came from. Can we do that? Okay.
It's
Okay. Jason is giving his approval. So here we go.
He didn't
Yeah,
come
that's
from
my fault.
anywhere.
I
He
should,
was a god.
well, I should not ask this question. So, okay, sorry. Okay.
That, you're my co-host, so I have to respect that. So, what are you going to do here? Okay. Now we're finally to my favorite part of this whole book. One thing above all must be clear to us: the entire comedy of art is neither performed for our betterment or education, nor are we the true authors of this art world. On the contrary, we may assume that we are merely images and artistic projections for the true author, and that we have our highest dignity in our significance as works of art. For it is only as an aesthetic phenomenon that existence and the world are eternally justified. While, of course, our consciousness of our own significance hardly differs from that which the soldiers painted on canvas have of the battle represented on it. So the question, what does Nietzsche mean by, for it is only as an aesthetic phenomenon that existence and the world are eternally justified? This is probably one of the more famous remarks that he made. And this is in the very beginning. Michelle.
What I think Nietzsche, means by existence and the world are eternally justified in that quote is because of the phenomenon of beauty, because aesthetics for me is about beauty, and the justification of the world is the appearance of beauty. Beauty is the rationalization of the terror of being, or beauty is a response to the problem of evil. And as the Attic tragedy is an aesthetic phenomenon, it justifies existence as worthy of being because of beauty. Beauty saves us from chaotic fear of insane nature. It's how we redeem nature's brutality. It helps us cope with indeterminacy, forms our chivalry or our bravery to withstand the onslaught of nature. We, as appearance of individuality, are borderlands that we maintain through beauty, such as form, which distinguishes us from the primal unity, that is the terror of the unity of nature, and our boundaries and our individuality offers an appearance. And yeah, that's about some of it.
Kwan.
Well, here it is quite easy because the answer is in the question. Because when it is written that that aesthetic phenomenon is the justification of the word, while aesthetic as design, the sensation, phenomena, the appearance of the sensation, which is the root deployment of the phenomenal reality. Okay, so it is by this mere surging of that phenomenal reality that is the justification of the word. Absolutely, the answer is in the question: aesthetic phenomena.
James.
The raw answer, a little bit like what I said, that the raw beauty before all analysis or before all philosophical consideration.
James.
Yeah, I don't think he mentions beauty, but that's a good throw. I think what he does say is that speaking from like an ideal, it's a very difficult quote, I think. How are these eternally justified, existence in the world? These are really important things, so how are these important categories, existence, the world, eternally justify these, and it's through this aesthetic phenomenon. And he does talk about the ideal perspective of a single being creator and spectator of the eternal comedy of art. Someone who is not the one whose entire knowledge of art is basically completely illusory, like the average human being, for example. This would be somebody that's really on top of the whole aesthetic existence. Someone who's speaking from the ideal perspective, the elevated perspective of the single being creator, quote, single being creator and spectator of the eternal comedy of art, and as opposed to someone whose knowledge of art is kind of not extremely sophisticated. So this is he's basically talking about either a god or somebody who is really has like a true art critic, somebody who has the understands the eternal aspect of the comedy of art and watches it as it progresses through history. That's his point that I think he's making. Almost like it has to be a god. It has to be someone like Apollo or Dionysius or God himself or whatever.
Jason.
Yeah, another question. I hope it's don't have a long answer, but the aesthetic here, Nietzsche uses it as a Greek term, space-time sensation, or he used it a German term as a beautiful, you know.
Well, etymologically, aesthesia means sensation, but aesthetic means pertaining to beauty, pertaining to the rooms of beauty.
So let's just stay with the phrase. Okay.
Yeah, what Nietzsche means. Yeah, that's what my question.
I will tell you what he means. When I'm waiting for everybody to offer their stuff, and then I'm going to give you my interpretation of what he means by that. Geneva.
Well, I'm kind of like Jason. You guys are so far above me on all of this, but it's such a fascinating conversation. Does Nietzsche really mean here? Because I have a problem with the definition here. For it is only as an aesthetic phenomenon that existence and the world are eternally justified. Only? I know very few things that are only one thing. Or is this just his way of stating his argument? Because that's kind of bugging me.
Okay.
When he says eternally, I think he means that it's going to continue. There's going to be a justification, but the justification is going to continue. And only if you want that justification to be continued in all times and places, and then we're going to have to look for a kind of a very high level of aesthetic, a very high way, a very high image of how this is actually justified, and it gets justified because of the ideal perspective that we place upon it.
Okay. I think that I know for a fact this is his break from the world being interpreted and justified by moral standards and religious standards and any other standard except artistic standards. And I think what he's trying to say is we are works of art, the will's works of art, and we can be artists of our own life. That's what I took from this. Later on, when I was thinking about this whole idea, artists create the world around us. they define, they bring order to the world, they create these spaces. Religions do the same thing. If you think of a religion as an artistic project, then it becomes aesthetic in its nature. And we wouldn't make sense of the world if artists didn't do it for us, because it's fundamentally senseless. So that's what I think he's trying to say here. There's only one thing that is reflective, and that's the act of creation of something new that makes in itself something valuable. James.
He wants it to be that's correct. He wants it to be from the perspective of a creator spectator, someone who is both a creator and a spectator of the world of art.
I think art, as in artistry, as in artifice, is a creation, as you mentioned, and because we don't live in a solipsistic state, we're in a society, we can always spectate, we can look at the art created or as well, you know, the movement we produce as being human, because we create ourselves.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Lindsay.
James.
Oh, I'm sorry, it was still up. The world helps create us. Yeah, I think we came to an agreement there. That was good.
We create us. We
Yeah.
create us.
No, the world feeds, there's a lot of feedback going on. I'm sorry, it's not all me. Okay. If anyone thinks it's all you, then good luck. Yeah.
No, I don't know where it's coming from either. It seems to be there. Okay. I think that the best thing to take away from this is that this is a break with the world defined in moral terms in the very beginning of his publishing career. This is going to be a major target for the rest of his life. And that's the importance of this particular moment that we're at here in this section. Anyway, so that's what I would like the takeaway to be. All right, I think we can do one more. Thus, all our knowledge of art is basically quite illusory, because as knowing beings, we are not one and identical with that being which, as the sole author and spectator of this comedy of art, prepares a perpetual entertainment for itself. Only insofar as the genius in the act of artistic creation coalesces with this primordial artist of the world, does he know anything of the eternal essence of art. For in this state, he is, in a marvelous manner, like the weird image of the fairy tale, which can turn its eyes at will and behold itself. He is at once subject and object, at once poet, actor, and spectator. And I just sort of repeating that to ask it as another question, because I think this is really the core of this particular chapter. So what does he mean by that? He's all of those at the same time.
I can't find my raised hand feature.
Well, I can't find it for you, so I don't know what to do.
I got it. I succeed. I have an artistic will. The artist, given that he has merged into the primal unity of the Dionysian sensibility, where her subjectivity is not one, but instead unity, she, the artist, is also object, for she is also inflicted with the form of Apollo, so visible structure, thus objectivity, which is appearance.
Yeah, I Nietzsche has issues with subjectivity and objectivity as useful words in this discussion, and that's what he's sort of arguing against, because that's a more modern interpretation.
Yeah.
So
Can I respond? Subjectivity
you have the dialectic, which is probably a good word to use, between the Apollinian impulse toward illusion that is not a personal thing. And he makes the point of how an Apollinian artist dwells on the images. He doesn't fuse with the image. And the Dionysian artist fuses with the creation that he is making. And that's the difference between the two. James.
Can I respond back to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
The Dionysian part is the primal unity. It's the formless place. And when Apollo touches that person with the laurel, that is the fusion of the two, where we get art, the mixture of the unbound imagination of formlessness and as will, that is our impetus to move through the feeling of music. And when we get touched by the Apollinian laurel, whatever, it gives us the ability to form images and projections and representations and semblance, and what was the proper word that they use, or a form of a structure, object.
Yeah, I like that a lot better, honestly. I know it may have sounded like I was picking on you, but other people were doing subjectivity, objectivity, all that, blah, blah, blah. I think what you just said was way better, way better.
Okay, thank you.
Where we're
The
going.
subjectivity is the unity. That's the primal unity. Is the subjectivity is the unity. That's the I. That's the place where the I can go. I move.
There's a modern sense of what subjectivity is, and the primal unity is the common space of everything in existence is one thing. This is Parmenides' idea, right? There's only one big thing. And that's the primal unity. It's not an internal subjective, which is the way we use that word today. And that's what I think Nietzsche is trying to get away from, is that this as an aesthetic way of describing this difference in art is wrong. That's a big part of what this chapter is about. James.
Yeah, I think this paragraph is the answer to the previous question, that the previous difficult question, the one that looks so difficult. How do you justify what is the aesthetic phenomenon that justifies existence? What's the aesthetic? How does that aesthetic phenomenon justify the world eternally? And how is eternal? How are these things justified eternally? And this is the answer, this paragraph. It's the union of subjectivity, of subject and object, simultaneous subject and object, in Nietzsche's words, simultaneous poet, actor, and spectator. He's making it completely clear that this is how the moment of genius, what occurs in the moment of genius, that unifies all of these bits, right? That are by themselves don't actually signify the truth. I am not just I am also the world that I live in. I am not just creator, I am also spectator. And I am not just the actor, I am also the poet. But that only occurs, comprehensively in the moment of the creation of a work of art. And that's what Plato is trying to bring us to.
Nietzsche.
Nietzsche, sorry. Yeah, get rid of Plato. Yeah.
Plato's this other guy. Okay, I want to repeat that again, because I think we're missing what he's saying. He's saying it is only as an aesthetic phenomenon that existence and the world can be justified eternally. The phenomenon is itself the justification. It's not being a good person, being an evil person. It's not a way of defining the world in any other way than as who you are and what you are going to do with your life. That's where I think he really is. It's the phenomenon itself that justifies life in the world and existence. Just that it's here at all, without a bunch of baggage attached to it, that the artists and religion attached to it. It's just life itself, our lives. Kwang.
Yeah, I just want to jump on what you just said, okay? Aesthetic phenomenon. It is really the manifestation of being in all the phenomena, okay? And there's no religious or aesthetic justification, etc. I stop here for that. According to the actor and the spectator and so on, I cannot resist to make a rapprochement with the idea of the 1 in 3 or 3 in 1, okay? You know, the knowing, the knower, and the know. And that is the absolute unity of being on one side, but on the other side, well, maybe it's another way for him to say that is how that the art of Greek tragedy comes into existence. Because let's not forget, Apollo represents the dream, the illusion, the shaper, the plastic arts, okay? And Dionysius represents the intoxication that leads to self-forgetfulness, to the music. And both together, the shaper and the intoxication, when they are in harmony, that would give birth to the Greek tragedy.
Right on. I think that you just summarized chapter 6, right? I mean, section 6, but that's okay because we're going to do it again for everybody. I want to try to keep us on the same page here in a lot of ways, and the focus is coming to Nietzsche with a beginner's mind. I don't know, Kwang, I don't think you were here when I asked for that in the beginning. It's as if we don't know anything but what Nietzsche is telling us. We need to have a little bit of background here and there and whatever, that sort of stuff. But we're not going to understand Nietzsche down the road if we don't see where his origins are, where he's beginning, how his thoughts are present already in this early stage of his life that are going to be developed and be a very important part of the way he looks at and describes the world in subsequent things. So I don't want to lose too much track here of the development of tragedy that he's describing. And that's what the book is fundamentally about, with a lot of these little extras thrown in. Michelle.
I don't think I have anything I want to say, actually.
Okay.
Okay.
I just wanted to bring up this idea of aesthetic. That I think what I was going to ask you, Lindsay, do you think that this is kind of like an idea or a principle of coming from Nietzsche of aesthetic omniscience? In other words, we know everything aesthetically. We tend to have a holistic view of the aesthetic phenomena. Yeah.
Phenomena, yeah. Okay. I don't know quite how to answer that. Maybe you're right. Maybe that is part of it. But it seems to me that he's beginning to establish this sense of we don't have anything that binds us other than being the wills, the primal unities work of art in which it finds its justification. This is the theme that he's sort of playing with. And that life only has value as a work of art, period. The end, just as explicit as that. So I don't go any other directions. I just stay with that and keep it in my heart, really. When I first read this, I was just blown away. And I told you, that's where I got this idea that the artists explain the world in one way. They're not right necessarily, but they're the ones that make sense of the senselessness of everything. When you read Jane Austen, the people that read Jane Austen saw a world shaped by her that they probably weren't living, but that was a world that looked good. It looked exciting and fun. And some of what she was describing were just things that existed that hadn't been, that weren't like things people thought about all the time or took for granted. And the artist takes that and makes it be sensible, makes it make sense. Nietzsche's not there yet. That's my own personal, that's the thing I did with the whole thing. But this is a break with other justifications for the world, especially Christianity, and a moral interpretation of the world. That's
Or is,
where he's at, and he's at there right at the very beginning.
could it be, instead of an interpretation, maybe an impetus of the world? But an impetus like the moral, the Christian morality as that which is how we understand good and how to be. Instead of that, it's the subjectivity of the world as our self in an objective expression of phenomena as the will to produce ourselves. If you're understanding a little bit about instead of the morality as our guiding overarching principles, it is our artistic expression, our motivation.
There aren't any guiding principles. We'll get there. We're not there yet.
Mhm.
There aren't any. We live as artists of our lives every day.
Mhm.
What is
Just by
what
the decisions we make and the choices we make and the directions we drive our life into. I think that's what he's saying.
I agree. That's what I'm saying. Is the art
Okay.
itself the time.
Then we agree. Geneva, did your question get answered at all? Did that help at all?
Sort of. I think what James was saying is the eternally sort of covered it, because he's saying only but eternally, so it's going to continue to develop. And I think that makes some sense to me. So
Well,
yeah.
Just if being alive or being in the world is a continuous act of creation,
Mm-hmm.
that's all it is. It's a continuous act of creation. It's got nothing, and it goes on forever because it's like forever is forever.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
Okay. All right.
I think we already over time, and
We are way over time, yes.
But we have
Oh,
a much better sense of aesthetic omniscience, though, you have to admit.
yeah, I really appreciate everything we said, but please remember, Lindsay and I designed this one. We want to make it very efficient, okay? So we don't want like last for 3 hours, and then we want to do it one. So please focus on the topic, because we know everybody have tons of knowledge, but there's no way to insert all knowledge here. So please focus on the Nietzsche and the beginning of Nietzsche, because I start to understand when I read Zarathustra, okay? Zarathustra, I start to understand why he said it, you know, when I read this part. So I think that's great, but I hope everybody focus on the page. Okay, Lindsay just present. Yeah, thank you.
Well, the page for today, that we will all desire the eternal return
We're going to get to
of every day the same, because it is absolutely aesthetic.
I was visiting Old Town in San Diego for about the third time with my family and visitors from overseas. And, you know, I realized, oh, this is what the eternal reoccurrence must be like.
No,
Old
that's
Town every
we'll
weekend.
get there. We'll get to the eternal recurrence of the same events, and that's a really fascinating concept. And the only thing, I just want to kind of keep it focused on Nietzsche as like with the beginner's mind, because I'm old and I want to live long enough to get through all of this stuff, which is probably going to take for years. So
Yes.
let's just stay here with this. Okay. Okay.
Okay. Thank you,
All right.
guys.
I'll see you guys.
Okay.
Goodbye,
right, thank you.
everyone. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.